Good evening from our headquarters in Kyiv. This is Hromadske International and the Sunday show at Hromadske International, the only prime-time TV program explaining Eastern European geopolitical storm in English, and I'm Natalia Humenyuk. So that's what we would watch today. KyivPride 2017, LGBTI march bigger than before with the feeling of equality. What to expect from possible meeting of the Ukrainian President Poroshenko and the US leader Donald Trump. Talking to the wife of an Azeri journalist kidnapped in Georgia. UN Human Rights Monitoring Mission proposes the mechanism to pay pensions to the Ukrainians in the conflict zone. And our exclusive interview with former US Secretary of State Madeleine Albright on women in politics. And please go to our webpage en.hromadske.ua in order to read the full version of the reports and the interviews as well. Please search to Hromadske International at our Twitter feed and also at our Facebook page. So there you'll see a lot of coverage, and I'll be back in a second. So we do have the great, I would say, panel here. We will discuss the KyivPride, which have taken place today, and we already can say that it was a major success. We have here Rebecca Herbst, the European MP of the European Parliament. Hi, Rebecca. It's already the third or the second Pride you've been to.
No, I have been here more often, but it's the second Pride which took place in the center of Kyiv.
And Anna Dovgopol, who is one of the members of the organization committee, so there were many people have come to the streets of Kyiv, and before we start the discussion, I suggest we watch the report.
Every person has the right to peaceful gathering, to peaceful expression, to freedom of speech. If we are talking about Ukrainian citizens, we should all have equal rights. They also work, they too pay taxes. Why should their rights be different from mine? The same goes for our opponents. They live here, they pay taxes. Why should their rights differ from mine? We live in a democratic country, and all citizens should understand that all people living in this country must live in peace, compliance, and friendship.
I think the atmosphere is very good. It is a party atmosphere. It is much bigger than last year. And I think you can see that people have decided to dress up and add some glitter this year, which is much more in keeping with the sentiments of pride.
People came here to say that they exist and they don't wish anything bad for anyone. In other countries, as far as I know, Pride looks like a celebration. Everyone is walking, people join in and have fun. Why would someone get the impression that this is some kind of propaganda? How can you make someone love anyone? People want to show that they are peacefully minded and everything is fine. We do not constitute a threat. We exist and we want the same rights as other people.
So that was the report. We've all been here, and Anna, probably you as one of the organizers, what do you need to say? What do people need to know about this particular Pride? How do you feel about it?
Well, on the part of the organizers and myself personally, I want to say that we're happy, we're excited, we're tired, but also very relieved that everything went safely. And I wish we come to that point in time where we feel only happy, where we don't need to feel thrilled and afraid of the opponents. But one of the most important things we want to say that the police worked almost perfect this year, and we are very grateful to them.
Oh, we'll talk to that as well. So, Rebecca, what have you mentioned? What would be your message?
I can continue where you just finished. I met the chief of the national police during Eurovision Song Contest days. Police already then was very busy in Ukraine, in Kyiv, to guarantee the safe stay of many, many people visiting Kyiv. And we talked already then on measures to be taken for the Pride, to guarantee the Pride. And today I can say Kyiv Police, National Police, they did a very professional job. And so with the people marching, also the police protected the rule of law and the rights of everybody in Kyiv, the right to protest, the right to march, and I like it.
How was your cooperation with the police? Because that's the point. You can't still it can't take place today, let's agree, in Ukraine if there is no security and protection.
True. Personally, I wasn't involved in cooperation, but I closely I talked to my colleagues who did that, and they said that it wasn't smooth all the way, but it was partially because probably police was busy with the Eurovision. But then there were not so many obstacles as it used to be before, so the police was for the most part cooperative. But it's obviously not the ideal situation, and there is still the way to go.
But, for example, in the very beginning today, I think they found a very professional way to de-escalate the situation, so to separate the Pride from these anti-LGBT people, the right-wingers or whoever it was. And it was very clear and very safe for the participants during the Pride. And what I can say, compared to last year, everybody was much more relaxed.
We've just seen the video. So there were up to 300 people who opposed the Pride. There were members of different far-right groups, so they were yelling, chanting. There was more usual. We knew that 7 of them had been arrested, but there were no major, as far as I understand, major violence or something that somebody was really hurt. What do we know up till now?
We know that 3 or 4 people were attacked after the march when they left. One person was beaten when he went out of the cafe, getting on the taxi. I think his finger is broken. Another person was chased to one of the to his house where he lives in Vinogradar, which is the outskirts of the city. I know that the 2 police officers were injured, but these injuries are, we can say that they are minor compared to the danger that was expected and to the last year's Pride. So the progress is there.
It's clear what we have to improve.
Yeah.
If to provide the impression of the Pride for those who hadn't been there, what you also would say, about the amount of people, about what would be the issues people raised. I also would encourage our director to show a bit more footage of, how it looked. And how was it, the feeling, compared to, the other Prides which are taking place globally?
So normally the Prides I joined in Western European countries, especially also in Germany, we don't need this kind of police work. Yeah, and clearly I would appreciate if in Ukraine once we would see the Pride not needed this kind of defense and protection. But I can say so today. I spoke to many participants participants. I met the mothers of LGBT people. I met colleagues from RADA, Svetlana Zalichuk. I met ambassadors from Canada. I know that also UK ambassador was there. Many staff from EU embassies. My friends from Munich, you always show, and now it's very nice to see them there. And everybody confirmed. We feel a bit more people participating, but mainly also they felt, what I said before, very relaxed and protected. Last year it was a bit more nervous.
What would you add to that? Did you share?
I signed to what Rebecca has said, and I was at the beginning of the column, so I personally didn't manage to see much. I still had to march after the 2 rows of the police officers, but I know that this year the march was much more diverse in terms of the different groups within the LGBT community that were represented. There were more radical, more liberal groups. There were drag queens. There were other people. We had a lot of international guests, and this was the real march of equality, diversity, whatever you call it, should look like.
And I've heard that, you couldn't, there was really the drag queens first time, and it had, given the sentiment of the prides you have in different Western cities from the West, from Kyiv, and not a lot of them from Kyiv have come, so you there were people from all over the country brought, in particular the drag queens. So what also, you think there were the people also there, they are sometimes at the price, those people who would protest. I'm not speaking about the far right or somebody who would try to use violence, but, people who are speaking for the traditional family values, they try to be loud but not violent. How do you see, and what would be also the answer for a larger part of the Ukrainian population who probably stayed at home? What you would like to address with that?
That people are different. That the slogan and the political agenda of the Pride, of this year's Pride, was that the country for all, the family for all, the medicine for all, education for all, you name it. Which means that people who live in this country and this territory, they're so different, they're so diverse. And but this shouldn't mean that one people should be more privileged than other people, or rather one people should be more underprivileged than others. If people want to build what we call traditional family, they're free to do, but then other people are free to build other types of families if they feel comfortable with that, and if they don't harm other people. This is the most obvious answer that is there.
But do you think, what are the still challenges which are remaining? We see that there was a lot of police, but with the communication, there were some of the MPs, there were some members, representative of the government, but and some of them really, like Vice Prime Minister, she expressed her support on her Facebook page before, but still in your conversation, there was no, support from, President, Prime Minister, a lot of other people. You're talking to a lot of the Ukrainian politicians.
But I think it will come. And I remember, so when we started to march in Germany, in the months of Pride, it was also not like today that many politicians joined or even had their coming out. Yeah? So it changed over the years. And I think in Ukraine it will also change, because I'm of the deep belief that Ukrainians are by heart a non-violent society. I remember very well the explosion against Yanukovych when he sent Berkut to the non-violent action of Maidan, since we saw a lot of change because of the war. But in the core, I think the Ukrainian society is a tolerant society and wants to live in peace. And so the main slogan today was really Ukraine is a country for all, and we will go there.
And just to add to the politicians, I have read on Facebook and then and also in media, positive statements from some of the political leaders, not necessarily MPs, who say that they're happy that the Pride has taken place and that everything is safe. And I've also seen some Max Nefedov at Pride, who works at the Ministry of Regional
Economy,
Development. Yeah, and several others, and that was the very positive signal.
So that was something like a signal for the others. So in generally, do you think that the theme of the, at least in the public space, the way that people started to speak about Pride has changed? Because it's true that during the time of conflict in the society, which is not very used, there is no secrecy about that. That in Eastern Europe, not a lot of people are used to those, to Pride and to open, honest discussion about LGBTI community, that the discourse had shifted, that there was some. Have you felt it?
I have. It started last year when, as the reaction to these far-right threats, so many people came out into the streets, people who have nothing to do with the LGBT community, but who came to support the right to expression and the freedoms that they stood at Maidan several years ago. And this happened this year as well. It did change. People start to react in a more calm way. They say it should not be an issue. We don't understand why it should be an issue. In the free country, everybody should have the equal rights. So the discourse, I mean, of course, the discourse in Kyiv, among specific group of people who communicate on Facebook, on social media, it did change. I still have the long way to go.
Anna, I would, for the end, would ask what are still the issues which needed to be solved and which could be solved, for instance, on the level of the government, of the parliament. Besides, because to change the public opinion, it's a long process.
True.
Yeah.
Among the most pressing ones are the new labor code that would include, among other things, also protection on the grounds of sexual orientation and gender identity. Because in the new version, it's not there. It was in the old version. It seems like it was only for the visa-free regime. Also, we desperately need protection. Law again that would articulate hate crimes and hate speech as specific types of crimes, and that should be and there should be punishment for that. So the law should recognize that the problem is there. So far, it doesn't exist for most of the groups, not only for the LGBT groups, and obviously partnerships, some regulations and partnerships, to name the few.
And Rebecca, that is a question, because it's already 1 week since Ukrainians enjoy visa-free regime with the European Union, and there is a bit of the thing here that, would it be the case that, since the major success had been achieved, that you don't need anymore to fulfill all these criteria? I'm speaking about the political, about the government, because it's true that the part this law had been adopted was because there was this promise that it connected to visa-free regime. So do you have this feeling that there would be different opportunity, I won't say to pressure, but that there won't be this this kind of a drive which make some of the reluctant members of parliament to do the things, just to change reforms, to go for to support human rights? And what would be your reaction?
Nobody should think that once you have organized the Pride, you can forget about the rights issues for minorities or LGBT people. So all the criteria must not be fulfilled or met only once. We need implementation of laws which have been prepared, and the EU will carefully follow the implementation. On the other hand, whatever we can do to make also Ukraine so more democratic and democratically stable country, the main change should not be based only on our criteria. The main change in society should be based on conviction. And I see that in many parts of society there is a good move, and we can support this with our criteria. We can support this also by sometimes knocking on the door of Rada, asking, what are you really doing? So democracy is always built by the citizens of a country and not from outside.
Okay, so Anna Dovgopol, who is one of the members of the organization committee from KyivPride, there is a larger team behind that. There are a lot of people working on it, but thanks for coming at these days to our studio. And Rebecca Harms, the member of European Parliament from the party of Greens and the great supporter of Ukraine. And I'll be back in a second with the rest of the program and numerous issues we would like to raise. Many Azerbaijani journalists have left their country for neighboring Georgia, escaping arrests and persecutions. Afgan Mukhtarli was one of them. He was investigating the business of Azerbaijan's ruling family in Georgia and criticizing the Georgian government for allegedly murky deals with oil-rich Azerbaijan. After Mukhtarli was kidnapped, he found himself back in his homeland. You can see the map of those two countries. The Azerbaijani authorities accused Mukhtarli of illegally crossing the border after the journalist was forcibly brought there. Georgia has been ineffective and reluctant to investigate the kidnapping. Journalists from 16 countries made an appeal to these governments and protested in front of the Azerbaijani and Georgian embassy in Riga, Latvia. Hromadske talked to Mukhtarli's wife, Leyla Mustafayeva.
Okay, so Leyla, what exactly happened to Afgan?
On May 29, so he didn't return home. So he made a phone call to me in the evening, 7 p.m. that he said that he is coming home, and if we need something for house, and I told him that he has just bread and sunflower seed kind of things, and he said that he will be at home soon. So I waited and waited. There was no response from him. The phone was switched off. And we waited. We didn't want to alarm that because we didn't have this idea that something he could be abducted. So we waited till morning, and in the morning I woke up and saw that his bed is as it was. So I became very worried and thought that that something is wrong with him. Either he has been arrested or abducted, kind of things. So we went to visit the police and just informed that he's missing. And that day, after a few hours, we received information from Baku that he's in Baku. And later he informed us through lawyers that he has been abducted in 100 meters away from our house by unknown people who were in masks and in the uniform of the criminal police of Georgia. And he was taken, beaten when he was detained, and was taken to the border, from the northern border between Azerbaijan and Georgia, and was delivered to Azerbaijanis in the land of Georgia.
Why do you think this could happen? Why Azerbaijan needs Afgan? What his expertise? What he was doing?
So he fled to Georgia in January 2015 because of these crackdown oppressions to NGOs and the journalists in Azerbaijan. Radio Freedom's office closed that down. Khadija was arrested. Our other NGO people was arrested, and the bank accounts of all these people was frozen. So he received an unofficial information that he will be arrested as well. That's why he fled Azerbaijan immediately. So after 2015, after he arrived to Georgia, he's an investigative journalist. He started investigate Azerbaijan top state officials' investment to Georgia. And it turned out that the first Ilham Aliyev's family members had hotels in Tbilisi, that he investigated their stake in Georgia's bank sector, and it turned out that they even have these big cargo companies in Georgia. So each was related to the family, to the members of the first family. And plus, Afgan was the first journalist who explored first family's business in Georgia. There wasn't any investigation from Georgia on this field. So plus he was very active and critical in his Facebook posts. He was openly criticizing the relationship between Georgia and Azerbaijan, democracy, gas interest, energy interests. And he was very active because after 2014, because of crackdown in Azerbaijan, a lot of journalists and activists fled to Georgia, and they create some community in Georgia, and he was one of the main persons who gathered them and created this community in Georgia, in Tbilisi. They were organizing the protest action in front of the Azerbaijani embassy in Georgia, and they were demanding release of political prisoners and journalists as well.
You think that this abduction or kidnapping had to do with both countries, that Georgia might have taken some part in that?
Yes, Georgia also is incited to this case. We have a lot of reasons to think like that. If we think that if just few small criminal group had abducted him, the police would be very motivated to investigate and explore those people, those persons who abducted him in the street. But later it turned out that before the investigation started, state officials, Prime Minister, Minister of Security, Minister of Internal Affairs, they made a statement that they are not incited to this abduction case. But it was weird. How could they knew about it before the investigation is finished? And plus, the investigation goes very slowly, and it looks like the police is not interested in exposing the criminals who did it, and it looks like they don't want to open the names of the people who controlled this abduction operation. And I think that these people are top state officials and people in the government of Georgia who agreed his abduction, or who controlled this abduction operation, because Afgan was saying that when these people took him to the border, on the way they were talking Georgians and they were reporting someone in the top.
Ukraine's President Poroshenko is supposed to meet with the US President Donald Trump early this week. As of yet, there is very little information about the visit. If the meeting takes place in Washington, US-Ukraine's policy will surely be discussed. How will it go? Will we see a prolongation of current US support for Ukraine, or could there be a major shift? At Hromadske, we don't have any confirmation of a new serious plan has been developed. But we do know that the US is going to have a special envoy for Donbass. Just before the visit, we've talked to former US ambassador to Ukraine, John Herbst, who's currently working for the Atlantic Council. We are awaiting, there was a news that there would be the meeting between the Ukrainian president and the US President Trump. So far there is no unofficial agenda, and it's pretty hard to, you can imagine what would be discussed. But what do I think, which are the things which might be raised, which could be raised and should be probably raised then?
First, what is America's position in support of Ukraine against Russian aggression in the Donbass? What is the American position on reform in Ukraine? How is the United States, what is the United States willing to do to support Ukraine in its war against Russia? These, I think, are the key issues.
What are we speaking now at this stage with this particular administration?
We've seen consistent statements by senior U.S. government officials regarding Ukraine. We know that, Vice President Pence and President Poroshenko met in Europe a few months ago. And of course, Foreign Minister Klimkin was in Washington a month ago, and so are the Vice President, and so are the President. And the United States at that time essentially reiterated the policies that were pursued by the Obama administration. We know that early in the administration, President Trump wanted to review our policy on sanctions toward Russia, but he wisely stopped doing that. And of course, we know that the Senate just passed legislation increasing sanctions. So I suspect that when Mr. Poroshenko gets to Washington, he will hear from American officials what he has already heard, which is, again, the policy which more or less continues where we've been for the past couple of years. I would like to see a stronger American policy. I believe we should provide defensive weapons to Ukraine. I think it would be a good thing for Mr. Poroshenko to ask for that, and it would be an even better thing for the United States to agree.
How probable is that? Because if there is a major change from, for instance, just the sanction policy, the pressure on Russia using this tool, at least some weeks before or sometime, that there is something is planning, there would be some principle change. You change sanctions for something else, there would be something new. Are we really discussing some kind of a new, what are the chances of, any kind of a real shift rather than just proceeding with the current policy?
It's clear, again, that we have, for whatever number of reasons, a policy today on Ukraine which looks rather similar to the one we had. And that's the most likely outcome. But it's also true that for whatever his peculiarities, President Trump kind of understands intuitively the importance of American power. And it's conceivable to me that his administration could recognize what I think is the common sense proposition, that helping Ukraine defend itself by providing defensive weapons strengthens our defense policies in Eastern Europe and hastens the day when Russia withdraws from Ukraine, withdraws from the Donbass, and ceases its aggression. And I believe that people around President Trump certainly understand this. And I think President Trump, too, could come to this conclusion. I'm not certain it will come in the next week or two, although it's possible. But over months, I think this is something we'll certainly be striving to achieve, and I think it could happen.
And how it goes with the U.S.-Russia current relation, and in particular, I would separate President Trump.
Well, again, it seemed to me early in the administration, President Trump wanted to give a gift to the Putin of sanctions relief without any Russian action to justify sanctions relief. But for political reasons in Washington, that became impossible. I believe that U.S.-Russian relations are at a very low level. There's no reason why we shouldn't have serious talks. But serious talks means that we represent our interests in those talks, and those interests include stopping Russian aggression in Ukraine, stopping Russian subversion in NATO and EU countries.
If we now, speaking about I won't say just particular with it, but still it's not very often, and it was a long-awaited and is a long-awaited discussion between the two presidents. If not just Trump, but the circle around, but the policymaker in DC, what if would be if Ukraine would, because so far still the Minsk agreement was the policy. It's supported by the European partners, and there are often talk that there is no alternative to that. So if there would be the decision or idea from the Ukrainian side that no, we would like to have defense weapon, we would like to change this policy at this stage, to what extent it could be supported by Washington?
You saw the statement made by Secretary Tillerson that we're not necessarily going to be bound by previous agreements. And so I think that this is a good way to look, a fresh way to look at this problem. I don't think it's something which either the Russians or the Germans or the French would dislike. In fact, we're hearing from Europe, yes, it would be good if the United States engaged. We're hearing from Moscow the same thing. So I see this as a possibility, and it's a good possibility.
Okay, and finally, can you provide this context of the last 2 weeks, on the sanction on Russia, how important that were, just to understand the current state of affairs?
The Congress has been very concerned since late January when Trump's people began to talk about reviewing sanctions. They're very concerned that there might be a weakening of sanctions policy. And they want to make clear that this would not happen. And so they proceeded to pass a law to impose additional sanctions. And this is very important by itself, but it'll become even more important if the House of Representatives approves this legislation or approves this, more likely something similar, and they reach agreement and sanctions are imposed.
Can we expect anything from the future possible meeting between Donald Trump and the Russian President Putin? Because that is an intrigue which I think the whole world is watching and waiting, because still we can't clarify those particular relations.
I think it will be hard for there to be a major improvement in U.S.-Russian relations unless Mr. Putin is willing to step back from the aggressive policies he's been pursuing. So I suspect when they do meet, they will try to make it look like a positive meeting. Maybe we'll be able to reach agreement on, again, some issues where we have similar interests, like deconflicting our militaries, but I don't think we'll be able to reach agreement on something large. Although actually, let me partly amend that. I think it's possible for the United States and Russia to cooperate on Syria.
And my final, again, I'm clarifying a lot, but there where there is a lack of information, there where the clarification is needed to have, the speculative discussion. So really, is there anything alternative agreement currently really discussed, or are we speaking that any of the sides, Ukraine, any representative of Ukraine, the government, or anybody would come up with something? So do we really have like a paper, an idea, which is really, brought to the table?
They may be developing something for all I know. We've already had, to this date, alternatives to Minsk, because you had this channel between Surkov and Nuland. And while the French and the Germans initially did not like this channel, eventually they saw its value. So conceivably we may be talking about a renewal of something like that. There's going to be an American envoy for the crisis, and I think it'll be a full-time position, so that person will be looking in all directions for ways to make progress. Minsk and beyond Minsk.
The Donetsk region is one of the most urban and populated territories of Ukraine. Only a few of the 1,000 villages such as Avdiivka and Pisky were unluckily enough to become widely known due to the notable battles there. But other villages have been totally forgotten. Our team traveled to one of them, Zhovanka, a village which is hard to find even on a map. 150 people currently live there. And most importantly, for almost 1 year, they haven't had any power.
Zhovanka is the last Ukrainian checkpoint in the village of Zaitseva, which is divided equally by the contact line and partly controlled by militants of the occupied so-called Donetsk People's Republic.
I live there on the boundary line. The street is in Ukraine and the garden is in the DPR. The city ends and they shoot. When the bombing started, I put a bath there for rainwater. We don't have any water, so I collect it. It got thrown out, goodness knows where. It looks like mines. Now we don't have water. My wife can't walk, but while I was carrying her out there, 3 shells went off nearby. We have to crawl out on our knees. So this is how we live, without water, power, firewood, coal. There's nowhere to escape.
800 people lived here before the war. Now there are only 150 left. Most of them are pensioners. They don't have bulletproof vests or helmets. None of the houses here have been left undamaged. In addition, locals have gone a year without power.
On June 25, 2016, the power lines were damaged because of shelling. 3 villages, Jovanka, Bakhmut, and Pisky, lived off this power line which went to the occupied Horlivka, and these 3 residential areas have not had power for a year.
A year on, the Donetsk military-civilian administration promised that they are about to start repairs. They say they are just waiting for permission from the Joint Center for Control and Coordination for a ceasefire.
They promised that they were about to start repairs a year ago. They say that they can negotiate with the Donetsk People's Republic for a ceasefire. They could bring power to us from Toretsk, that's under Ukrainian control. But all they have done is brought over some poles and left them on the grass. They haven't repaired anything, even in places where there isn't any shooting. If we could, we would have brought the power line to the village ourselves, just drag them to our village.
The Donetsk military and civil administration has provided 5 generators for the whole of Jovanka, so that people can charge their phones and print documents to collect their pensions. People pay for the fuel for the generators out of their own pensions. Many people spend money on radiators, torches, and stoves.
Yet we were glad to say that after watching this report, the governor of Donetsk region, Pavlo Zhebrivsky, paid attention to this particular village for practically the first time and brought a power generator there. My colleagues also spoke to the head of the UN Human Rights Monitoring Mission in Ukraine, Fiona Fraser. Their mission has just issued a new report on the casualties of the conflict. Overall, 36 civilians were killed and 157 injured during last 3 months. And they are concerned these numbers will rise this year as there was increase in death in the summer in previous years. Ms. Fraser also explained the mechanism which may help Ukrainians in the conflict zone receive their pensions.
Ви дуже чітко документуєте, і ми розуміємо, що документуєте і цифри вбитих.
How do you manage to document the number of casualties in the occupied territories?
There were some 36 civilians who were killed and 157 who were injured. And for us, this identifies that there is a 48% increase in civilian casualties in comparison to the previous 3-month reporting period. And the majority of those cases are due to shelling. And also what concerns us is this increase does not also bode well, bearing in mind that over the previous years of the conflict, we've always seen an escalation occurring in the summer. So we're worried that based on the previous three-year trend of the conduct of hostilities and where the spike was, particularly in the month of August, and bearing in mind that we're seeing an increase in the number of civilian casualties.
Ще одне маленьке уточнення. Я бачу, зараз є цифра 10.
Then these numbers, 10,090 killed. There were 2,777 civilians. We have the numbers of Ukrainian soldiers killed, which is about 5,000. The rest are representatives of illegally armed groups. Am I understanding this correctly?
As I've said, the overall figure is based, when it comes to Ukrainian armed forces, it's based on official information that comes from the government of Ukraine. When it comes to, we also receive the information from members of the armed groups, the official spokespersons, and then the work that we're doing is documenting when it comes to civilian casualties. We've always stressed that we believe this is an estimate, and that we think that it's probably an underestimate as well.
Якою ви зараз бачите найбільшою
What do you think is the biggest problem in the controlled and uncontrolled territories? We know that now there are huge problems with water supply in those regions.
Зараз забезпечення водою населення.
Ongoing conflict in the east, we have two very different situations depending where an individual is on which side of the contact line. We have a situation where for an individual that lives in government-controlled areas, there is some form of means to access justice, whereas for those that continue to reside on armed group controlled territories, in this report we have documented. So we have concerns for questions of access to justice and the means that an individual can raise a complaint, raise a concern. And then on top of that, you have situations for individuals about how they're able to move back and forth across the contact line. As we've all seen over this last 3-month period, again, huge numbers of people go back and forth across the contact line, and they go for many different reasons. I was recently, last week, in Stanicu Luganska, and there, when I was in the middle of the bridge, I was able to speak to individuals who were speaking about they were going to get their pensions, they were going to get money from the bank. There were people who had returned back from government-controlled areas to the self-proclaimed Lugansk People's Republic, who actually found that they were no longer entitled to receive their pension because of this verification process that's been implemented, which has actually seen over 400,000 who are no longer pensioners who are no longer entitled to their pension. We have an ongoing concern also with the fact that you have people who continue to reside in armed group controlled territories, who children are being born, unfortunately people are dying, people need their civil registration documentation, and that is a very important aspect for them, for how they're able to live their lives. So that's actually one thing that we're working with other partners on, how there can be an administrative procedure put in place that could ease this, and therefore enable all those who continue to reside there to really feel that they are continue to be part of Ukraine.
Повертаючись до питання пенсії, я знаю, що зараз місія ООН намагається все ж таки схилити умовно уряд чи якось його переконати в тому, що пенсії повинні виплачуватися.
I know that the UN mission is currently trying to persuade or convince the government that pensions have to be paid in the occupied territories, not just to those who have IDP status. How are you currently working on this topic?
Можливість всі отримувати пенсії за законом України.
The issue of receiving a pension and in order to receive a pension, the need to be registered as an IDP. They're two very different things, so we would like to see these separated. And we would also like to see put in place a mechanism that simplifies the means by which individuals can cross the contact line to government-controlled areas and there receive their pension. I think it's important to recognise what maybe are the constraints, but we also see it as an opportunity which the government could really reach out and send a clear message to individuals who are entitled to such a payment as pensioners, to show that there is an openness and a willingness to really reach out to them and ensure that they do receive what they are entitled to after the many years that they have spent working as a citizen of Ukraine.
Головна позиція уряду в тому, що вони не виплачують пенсії людям, це те, що умовно ці гроші підуть на терористів.
The official government position is that they will not pay pensions on the pretense that the money will go to the terrorists and supporting them. What do you, as part of an organization that communicates and works with these occupied territories, say about this?
Наскільки вони важко почуваються справді без цих законних їм виплат?
I think we're dealing with a segment, if you like, of the population, those who have reached pension age, which can be vulnerable for many other reasons because of it might be to do with healthcare, to name just one.
Як насправді виглядає ситуація там, наприклад, Луганську, в інших містах, де ми знаємо,
We know that there is really a problem with water supply, and that the liberated territories do not supply water to the occupied ones. What kind of water quality are you seeing there? Could there be a public health threat as a result of people using this water?
Concern is that with the shelling, with the then maybe cessation of supply of water as a result of that. It can either result in less quantity of water being supplied to individuals, or the question regarding the quality of the water. And clearly, as we're going into the sort of peak months of summer, this is of a concern for a number of reasons, no less of which is the whole question of healthcare for individuals.
Is it much easier for a woman to be a politician in 2017? This may seem obvious, but there are still a lot of challenges. Former US Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, you may see her on the screen, unsuccessfully ran for presidency in the US, just one recent example. Yet this week we had a chance to talk to another former US Secretary of State, Madeleine Albright, during her visit to Kyiv. She was the first woman to ever hold this position. She was here in Ukraine to promote female participation in politics in Central Eastern Europe. And this is the topic of her interview with my colleague Zhanna Bespenchuk.
Do you personally believe in the so-called theory that the more women are in the power, the less violence and warfare and poverty are in the world?
I do believe that that in fact that women have more of a capability of reaching out to each other and having a way of empathy and understanding each other. I don't think that not every woman I've ever met or studied has been has not used force. And so I think we have to be careful about generalizations, but I do think that women have a capability of reaching out, understanding, working with each other across ethnic lines or tribal lines, and I've seen it in a number of countries, and certainly something that when I was Secretary of State I promoted, and then Hillary Clinton, when she was Secretary of State, really worked on that whole process. And it all began in many ways at the Beijing conference 25 years ago, when Hillary Clinton said women's rights are human rights and human rights are women's rights, and every country undertook a plan of action. And so the question is how we keep pursuing that and make it a common effort.
Mm-hmm. Your personal story as a Secretary of State, concerning your personal experience, what kind of gender-related difficulties did you face, did you encounter, if any, during your work?
Well, I was one of an early generation of women, and despite the fact that I had a PhD, people wondered what I was doing in the room, and people thought when my name came up to be Secretary of State that a woman could not be Secretary of State, primarily because Arab countries would not deal with a woman. So then what happened was the Arab ambassadors at the UN, because I had been ambassador at the UN, said we had no problems dealing with Ambassador Albright. We wouldn't have any problems dealing with Secretary Albright. Foreign countries, I think, began to get used to dealing with me, because if they wanted to have a diplomatic relationship with the United States, I was the person that had to do it. I frankly had more problems with the men in our own government, but President Clinton wanted me there, and so that gave me the credibility. But it's not simple. But that is why there need to be more women in everybody's government, because we need to support each other, and when there are other women, then we are more helpful and can work together. I think the thing that would happen was I actually would be told not to argue emotionally, what my views were and why. And I learned to argue very pragmatically and straight. And I finally decided I did have the highest ranking job, and the president wanted me there, and so I found my voice, and I spoke very strongly, and I'm very proud of what we were able to do during the Clinton administration in terms of expanding NATO, working to stop the ethnic cleansing in the Balkans, and that had a lot to do with having the capability to express my arguments clearly.
There are regions like Middle East, Eurasia, and, for example, North Africa, where the situation is the worst. You have the global perspective for this issue. So what could be suggested?
Well, I think I have actually spent time in North Africa and in the Middle East and talked to a variety of women's groups there. I think that they do want to be much more involved, and many of them are more involved than we ever hear about. But I think we have to keep pushing. What we, I think, have to understand that cultures are different, history is different. We can't all be at exactly the same place, but we do have to support each other. I think in some ways, American women sometimes make a mistake thinking that everybody has to be exactly like American women. I do think we need to respect culture in other countries, but I don't think anybody can say X country is not ready for democracy, because people all everywhere want to make decisions about their own lives, and so we need to be supportive of each other.
You're actually familiar very much with Central Eastern Europe, because in by origin you came from the Czech Republic, Czechoslovakia, the former Czechoslovakia. So what do you see in Central Eastern Europe or in this area of the world? What would you suggest to the women here, especially women in the post-communist countries, in post-Soviet countries like Ukraine?
It's interesting because I have now met with a lot of Ukrainian women and other women in other countries in Central and Eastern Europe. I think that the important part is to work together, to form coalitions, to decide on what the agenda is and work together to make sure that it gets into the parliaments, that there are really ways to make clear that women are capable of any job, and not to have the discrimination of kind of saying women can't do it. I think women need to support each other, because there really, even among women, is kind of a sense of, oh, I can't do it. No man ever says I can't do it. And I think that we need to build each other's confidence, but politically, what I think is important is to create coalitions and work together, and work not only in the capital cities in Kyiv, but also out in the local areas, so that there are women at all levels kind of working their way up, and that there is that support system. But it's not simple.
To remind you, watch full versions of the report and interviews at our webpage en.hromadske.ua. Thank you from the entire Hromadske International team for watching. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook, search Hromadske International. Stay tuned and goodbye.